Aaron and Melissa here for TruthStreamMedia.
Hi, everybody.
If you guys have seen the news at all tonight, you've seen for yourself that the coroner's report on Michael Hastings has come out, and at his autopsy they found traces of meth and pot, actually it was amphetamine and pot, in his system, and the media is having a freaking field day with this, you guys. It's everywhere. This is AP out of ABC News. It says, the whole story starts with the line, after 14 years of sobriety, journalist Michael Hastings had returned to drugs. And I want to note that after 14 years means that the last time he did drugs was when he was 19 years old. So he was a teenager at the time. No one's mentioning that. They're just starting with 14 years of sobriety. Journalist Michael Hastings returned to drugs. And he had traces of amphetamine and marijuana in his system. And you can see this everywhere. This one's on the smoking gun. Autopsy shows journalist Michael Hastings had meth, pot in his system at the time of fiery crash. This one is from the LA Times. Coroner family link Michael Hastings to drug use at time of death. And they even go on to say in this story that neither one of these things were considered a factor in his crash, according to his toxicology report. But that's not going to stop the media from running with all of these headlines. And where they're getting this from is this autopsy report that came out. Now, you'll have to forgive Aaron and I if we're just ignorant on this, but this is a very strange report to us. And for one reason, this informant witness statement that's included here goes on for an awfully long time. It's the biggest section of the narrative of this report. You've got the investigation is this one little paragraph, and then you've got a little scene description paragraph and a little body examination paragraph. But this witness statement is like 5 paragraphs long. It's comprises most of the narrative of this report. And what it says is that the detectives had gone to Hastings' residence, and Blank arrived there at 8:30 hours, having learned they were attempting family contact. Per Blank, he had just arrived from New York City the day prior with another brother scheduled to arrive later the same morning. That suggests to us that this might be Hastings' brother giving this statement, because it says with another brother scheduled to arrive. And he had 2 brothers. So that's what it seems like to us. Anyways, it says the family was attempting to get Michael Hastings to go to detox, and that he was believed to be sober for the past 14 years, and that they believed he had just started using drugs again in the past month or so. So within the past month or so, prior to this big story that he was working on, which he emailed his editor and said, I have to go off the radar. By the way, the FBI might be coming to question you guys. Right in that same time, he also apparently decided, according to this witness statement, to start using drugs again. And within weeks, they were already getting ready to do an intervention on him and put him into detox. He then goes on to tell the investigators that he felt that Hastings was currently using DMT. Yes, he had a medicinal marijuana card that was for PTSD from having had assignments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Then in the middle of that, he goes on to mention that there was a past traffic collision in which Hastings had collided into a pole several years ago, and that he was believed to be under the influence at that time. And then he goes into the whole story about how I guess Hastings had misused Ritalin, and at one point it was believed that Hastings was bipolar, but it was later learned his behavior was stemming from Ritalin misuse, and that he was institutionalized in rehabilitative care in 1999, again when Hastings was 19 years old. And then he went ahead and added that he believed Hastings believed that he was invincible and could jump from a balcony would be okay. And he added that he would not be surprised if any stimulants were found within the residence, including cocaine.
Well, the bottom line is it creates an account that the media is clearly going to run with, and now Hastings' death will be associated with reported drug use. And if this is all true in the first place, it's obviously cherry-picked, because it contrasts quite a bit with his distinguished career as an investigative journalist and as someone on the tail of a big story, someone who had already had big stories, like the big one where he exposed General Stanley McChrystal, the highlight Rolling Stone story. And we have seen cases before where family members and so-called friends come forward to steer the narrative, and sometimes they turn out not to be real friends, occasionally imposters, but mainly you see family members pressured or intimidated into going along with official stories. In extreme cases, there's places like Oswald, the accused assassin of JFK, where his wife Marina was literally handled by FBI and other people very involved in the case, literally dressed up in nice clothes to put on a story that she would later recant and regret as she understood more of the full context of what happened there. In this case, we see an attempt to shift from why was this crash suspicious, why was the engine ejected and thrown, why the big fires, and was there an important political connection with his reporting.
See, and that goes back to these stories here that we see coming out. They're not answering any of the questions surrounding the suspicious wreck that happened, how he died, under what circumstances, and what he was working on at the time. None of that stuff is going to matter now. Now they're just going to focus on this. This is all you're going to see now, probably for the next week or two, or however long they decide to milk it. They're not going to answer the real questions, and some of those questions we need answers to. For example, it was confirmed that Hastings was set to do a story on CIA Director Brennan. That was going to be the next story he did. And Kimberly Dvorak at San Diego 6 points out that she was sent a leaked email from WikiLeaks right here, which talks about Brennan actually. And this was a leaked email from Stratfor, which is a CIA intelligence contractor. And it says here, Brennan is behind the witch hunts of investigative journalists learning information from inside the Beltway sources. Note, there's a specific tasker from the White House to go after anyone printing negative materials to the Obama agenda. Even the FBI is shocked. The Wonder Boys must be in meltdown mode. And that was sent in 2010. And this is tied to Hastings for several reasons. One of those being Barrett Brown. Barrett Brown and Michael Hastings were not only friends and colleagues, they had both written about each other, but Hastings was getting ready to do a whole report on Brown. Brown, of course, as we've reported before, is currently awaiting trial in a federal prison of 105 years, having to do with these leaks and this information that you see here on WikiLeaks.
Well, there's a bigger story as well between the hackers and the surveillance system that's grown up around us. It goes far beyond just Snowden and the NSA PRISM leaks. There was stuff going on with Anonymous, with WikiLeaks, with all these different groups. And just as Glenn Greenwald is strongly tied to all these releases and trying to shed light on what the NSA is doing, Michael Hastings was strongly tied particularly to Anonymous and to Barrett Brown, who had released the documents that were hacked by someone else pertaining to NSA contractors, HB Gary Federal, Palantir, Endgame Systems, and others, many of which were former intelligence officials now doing private work on behalf of banks and departments of the government.
And it says here that before his untimely death, Hastings was working on a story about Barrett, and that he had announced to his followers, "Get ready for your mind to be blown," and that he'd been in touch with Barrett's lawyers, was going to interview him in June for the story in prison, and that Hastings had called Barrett's charges trumped up FBI charges regarding legitimate reportorial inquiry into the political collective known sometimes as Anonymous. So you've got that going on. Then you have the actual crash itself. Let's look at this video. You can clearly see when the car comes sliding into the screen, a flash right there before it actually hits. And then you have this fantastic, gigantic explosion, very bright, huge explosion. And the car actually burned at this really intense white flame for quite some time after that. This is LA Loud Labs News on the scene right after the crash happened, filming it. And as you can clearly see, that fire is very high up. It's very hot. The lighter the flame, the hotter this fire is. And as you can see, this fire is comprised of mostly very white flames. Right here, very white, very hot. And then you have yellow surrounding it, and then orange. This isn't very consistent with, you can go to YouTube and find many other crash videos and other things. It does not appear to be consistent with any of those. Like, as for an example, this is a police chase. This car is going at very high speeds on a highway and slams into the median and bursts into flames. Watch what happens here. You see the fire breakout of this car hitting at a very high speed, very high rate of speed, but you do not see these very hot, very bright white flames are not present in this explosion. As you can clearly see them here, this white flame is huge. And this is a car just burning on fire. It didn't actually hit anything. But again, it's burning the same gasoline that Hastings' car would be burning. And again, you do not see that white flame. I mean, you see some white flame. There's some white flame in there, the white, hot, brightest, hottest part of this fire. But it's definitely not to the level that can clearly be seen here. I mean, this is insanely large, white, intense flame. And here's the difference. I mean, if you look, it's very bright here. And it burns like that for a very long time. It does not start to get quiet down. And this one does as well. But again, you're not seeing the same type of flame.
It's an extreme fire for a car crash when that only happens in some cases to begin with.
Well, let's say that the car drove right into the tree and just exploded on impact in this crazy flame, as apparently it did, or according to the official story. This is a car that's purposefully being blown up with tannerite, which I know that the types of explosion, what the explosion is made with does have a say in what's burning in the flames. But let's just take a look at this for a second. All right, so you have your huge, ginormous explosion, but again, you don't see that bright white flame. You see mostly orange, mostly yellow in the flames. You're not seeing it. It's just not there. And this is actually from the scene. This was taken by a YouTuber 3 days after his death. And so there you can see where the car drove up, and this is the tree. And she's just filming at the scene, talking to the people that are there. And at one point, she pans the camera back and shows you the road. This is the road that he came driving up. And as you can clearly see here, there are no skid marks on this road. There's no skid marks whatsoever. There may be tire marks there somewhere. I know that the police did mark some off with chalk, but there are no skid marks on this road. And then you've got them putting a white sheet over this entire part of the car over here. Why are they covering the car with a sheet? I mean, obviously they may or may not have removed Mr. Hastings at this time, but they're covering the front part of the car with a sheet.
Where the engine was suspiciously ejected.
Engine was suspiciously missing. Here are some shots of cars that have hit a tree head on. Okay? Even this one, which really hit the tree. I mean, this car wrapped itself around the tree, shoved everything back into the car. All the engine and everything is in there. Is this car exploded? No. Look at this one. This car was reportedly going 100 miles an hour when it hit this tree. 100. And killed the man who was in it instantly, unfortunately. But as you can see, most of the parts of the car are around the car, are in the car area. So, and this was a wreck at 100 miles an hour directly into a tree. So how come Hastings' car hits a tree and his engine somehow is completely disconnected from the entire car? Here's the engine, and flies over 100 feet all the way down to land on the corner. How does that happen? How does an engine just go flying out of a car? I mean, even with it hitting the tree, supposedly hard enough to make it burst into this crazy white flame I showed you earlier, I mean, that seems a bit of a stretch, okay? And then you see here, the car didn't even, I mean, if it hit the tree dead on, it must have moved at some point, because it's not wrapped around the tree as you see in so many of these other collisions where a car has a super fast impact with a tree, or like this here. What you're seeing is the car is over to the side of the tree, and somehow it still exploded. So did it bounce back off the tree and then go back forward again? How come we can't see the front of the car to see that impact of buckling in the middle of the hood where the tree would have landed? I mean, it's interesting. You don't get these questions answered, though. All of this stuff is something that should be considered. Why aren't we having any of these questions answered about how this is possible, or why his wreck had this kind of white hot intense flame and not the kind of flames you see in virtually every other car on fire or car explosion? Why is it inconsistent? Why all of these inconsistencies? Why are we not going to have these questions answered about this man? Instead, the only thing we're going to be told about him is that now he was using drugs.
Well, let's face it attacks his character, and I don't understand what any amount of drug use would account for the way that crash went down.
No, what he did with the drugs, they even admitted right here that it was not a factor in the crash.
Even
it
highly reckless driving wouldn't explain those forensics.
No, it doesn't make any sense at all. And it doesn't matter if he was doing every single drug that's in the existence of humankind. It does not answer the questions about what was going on with this car. And we need to continue answering those questions, because if one journalist isn't safe for blowing the whistle on this government, then all of us are not safe. This guy was 33 years old and this happened. And we need to keep asking those questions. This case is not over. TruthStream Media, we'll talk to you guys later.
Talk to you later.